Needless havoc. As man proceeds toward his announced goal of the conquest of nature, he has run a depressing record of destruction, directed not only against the earth he inhabits, but against the life that shares it with him. The history of the recent centuries has its black passages: the slaughter of the buffalo on the western plains, the massacre of the shorebirds by the market gunners, the near extermination of the aggregates for their plumage. Now, to these and other like them, we are adding a new chapter and a new kind of havoc: the direct killing of birds, mammals, fishes, and indeed practically every form of wildlife by chemical insecticides, indiscriminately sprayed on the land. Under the philosophy that now seems to guide our destinies, nothing must get in the way of man with the spray gun. The insenticidal victims of this crusade against insects count as nothing if robins, pheasants, raccoons, cats, or even livestock happen to inhabit the same bit of earth as the target insects. To be hit by the train of insect-killing poisons, no one must protest. The citizen who wishes to make a fair judgment of the question of wildlife loss is today confronted with a dilemma. On the one hand, conservationists and many wildlife biologists assert that the losses have been severe and in some cases even catastrophic. On the other hand, the control agencies tend to deny flatly and categorically the losses have occurred, or that they are of any importance if they have. Which view are we to accept? The credibility of the witnesses is of first importance. The professional wildlife biologist on the scene is certainly best qualified to discover and interpret wildlife loss. The entomologist, who specifically is insects, is not so qualified by training and is not psychologically disposed to look for undesirable side effects of his control program, yet is in control men in state and federal governments, and, of course, chemical manufacturers, who steadfastly deny the facts reported by the biologists and declare they see little evidence of harm to wildlife. Like the priests in Levi in the biblical story, they choose to pass by on the other side and to see nothing, even if we charitably explain their denials as due to the short-sightedness of the specialists and the men with an interest. This does not mean we more accept them as qualified witnesses. The best way to form our own judgment is to look at the same of the major controller programs and learn from observers familiar with the ways of wildlife and unbiased in favor of chemicals. Just what has happened in the wake of a rain of poison falling from the skies into the world of wildlife, to the bird watcher, the suburbanite who derives joy from birds in his garden, the hunter, the fisherman, or the explorer, or the wild regions. Anything that destroys the wildlife of an area for even a single year has deprived him of pleasure to which he has a legitimate right. This has not been a valid point of view, even if, as sometimes happens, some of the birds and mammals and fishes are able to reestablish themselves after a single spraying. A great and real harm has been done, but such reestablishment is unlikely to happen. Spraying tends to be repetitive, and a single exposure from which the wildlife populations might have a chance to recover is a rarity. What usually results in a poisoned environment, a lethal trap, in which not only the resident population succumb, but those who come in as migrants as well. The larger the area sprayed, the more serious the harm. Perhaps no oasis of safety remain. Now in a decade marked by insect control programs in which many thousands or even millions of acres are sprayed as a unit, a decade in which private and community spraying has also surged steadily upward, a record of destruction and death of American wildlife has accumulated. Let us look at some of these programs and see what has happened. During the fall of 1959, some 27,000 acres in southeastern Michigan, including numerous suburbs of Detroit, were heavily dusted from the air with pellets of aldrin, one of the most dangerous of all chlorinated hydrocarbons. The program was conducted by the Michigan Department of Agriculture with the cooperation of the United States Department of Agriculture. Its announced purpose was control of the Japanese beetle. Little need was shown for this drastic and dangerous action. On the contrary, Walter P. Nichol, one of the best known and best informed naturalists in the state, who depends much of his time in the field with long periods in such Michigan every summer, declared, "For more than 30 years, to my direct knowledge, the Japanese beetle has been present in the city of Detroit in small numbers, The numbers have not shown any appreciable increase in all lapse of years. I have yet to see a single Japanese beetle, 1959, other than the few caught in government catch traps in Detroit. Everything is being kept so secret that I have not yet been able to obtain any information whatsoever to the effect that they have increased in numbers. An official release by the state agency merely declared that the beetle had put in its appearance in the area designated for the aerial attack upon it. Despite the lack of justification, the program was launched, with the state providing the manpower and supervising the operation, the federal government providing equipment and additional men, and the communities paying for the insecticide. The Japanese beetle, an insect accidentally imported into the United States, was discovered in New Jersey in 1916, when a few shiny beetles of metallic green color were seen in a nursery near Riverton. The beetles, at first unrecognized, were finally identified as a common inhabitant of the main islands of Japan. Apparently, they had entered the United States on nursery stock imported before restrictions were established in 1912. From its original point of entrance, the Japanese beetle has spread rather widely throughout many of the states east of the Mississippi, where conditions of temperature and rainfall are suitable for it. Each year, some outward movement beyond the existing boundaries of its distribution usually takes place. In the eastern areas where the beetles have been longest established, attempts have been made to set up natural controls. Where this has been done, the beetle populations have been kept at relatively low levels, as many records attest. Despite the record of reasonable control in eastern areas, the Midwestern states, now on the fringe of the beetle's range, have launched an attack worthy of most deadly enemy instead of only a moderately destructive insect, employing the most dangerous chemicals distributed in a manner and that exposes large numbers of people, their domestic animals, and all wildlife to the poison intended for the beetle. As a result, these Japanese beetle programs have caused shocking destruction of animal life and have exposed human beings to unimaginable hazard. Sections of Michigan, Kentucky, Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri are expecting a train of chemicals in the name of beetle control. The Michigan spraying was one of the first large-scale attacks on the Japanese beetle from the air. The choice of aldrin, one of the deadliest of all chemicals, was not determined by any particular suitably for Japanese beetle control, but simply by the wish to save money. Aldrin was the cheapest of the compounds available. While the state, in its official release to press, acknowledged that aldrin is a poison, it is implied that no harm could come to human beings in the heavily populated areas in which the chemical was applied. An official of the Federal Aviation Agency was later quoted in the local press to the effect that this is a safe operation, and representative of the Detroit Department of Parks and Recreation it added his assurance that the dust is harmless to humans and will not hurt plants or pets. One must assume that none of these officials had consulted the published and steadily available reports of the United States Public Health Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service, and other evidence of the extremely poisonous nature of aldrin, acting under the Michigan Pest Control Law, which allows the state to spray indiscriminately without notifying or gaining permission of individual landowners. The low-lying planes began to fly over the Detroit area. The city authorities and the Federal Aviation Agency was immediately besieged by the calls from worried citizens. After recovering nearly 800 calls in a single hour, the police begged radio and television stations and newspapers to tell the watchers what they were seeing and advising them it was safe. According to the Detroit News, the Federal Aviation Agency's safety officer assured the public that the planes are carefully supervised and are authorized to fly low. In a somewhat mistaken attempt to allay fears, he added that the planes had emergency valves that would allow them to dump their entire load instantaneously. This fortunately was not done, but as the planes went about their work, the pellets of insecticides fell on beetles and humans alike, showers of the harmless poison descending on people shopping or going to work and on children out from school for the lunch hour. Housewives swept the granules from porches and sidewalks where they are said to have looked like snow, as pointed out later by the Michigan Operating Society. In the spaces between shingles on roofs and eaves, trews, and cracks in bark and twigs, the little white pellets of aldrin and clay, no bigger than a pinhead, were lodged by the millions. When the snow and rain came, even puddles became possible death potion. Within a few days after the dusting operation, the Detroit Audubon Society began receiving calls from the birds. According to the Society's secretary, Miss Ann Boy, the first indication that the people were concerned about the spray was a call I received on Sunday morning from a woman who reported that coming home from church she saw an alarming number of dead and dying birds. The spraying there had been done on Thursday. She said there was no birds at all flying in the area, that she had found at least a dozen dead in her backyard, and the neighbors had found dead squirrels. All of their calls received by Miss Boy that day reported a great many dead birds and no live ones. People who all maintained bird feeders said that there were no birds at all at their feeders. Birds picked up in a dying condition showed the typical symptoms of insecticide poisoning, tempering. People who maintained bird feeders said that there was no birds at all in the feeders. Birds picked up in a dying condition showed the typical symptoms of insecticide poisoning, tremoring, loss of ability to fly, paralysis, convulsions. Nor were birds the only forms of life immediately affected. A local veterinarian reported that his office was full of clients with dogs and cats that suddenly sickened. Cats who so meticulously groomed their coats and licked their paws seemed to be most affected. Their illness took the form of severe diarrhea, vomiting, convulsions. The only advice the veterinarian could give his clients was not to let the animals out necessarily, or to wash the paws promptly if they did so. Despite the insistence of the city council health commissioner that the birds must have been killed by some other kind of spraying, and the outbreak of throat and chest irritations that followed the exposure to aldrin must have been due to something else, the local health department received a constant stream of complaints. A prominent Detroit interest was called upon to treat 4 of his patients within an hour after they had been exposed while watching the planes at work. Hall has similar symptoms: nausea, vomiting, chills, fever, extreme fatigue, and coughing. The Detroit experience has been repeated in many other communities, as pressure has mounted to combat the Japanese beetle with chemicals. At Blue Island, Illinois, hundreds of dead and dying birds were picked up. Data collected by bird banners suggest that 80% of the songbirds were sacrificed. In Joliet, Illinois, some 3,000 acres were treated with heptachlor in 1959. According to reports from a local sportsman club, the bird population within the treated area was virtually wiped out. Dead rabbits, muskrats, possums, and fish were also found in numbers. One of the local schools made the collection of insecticide poisoned birds a science project.